Hello, my name is Paul Boag and I've been working in this industry for 30 years. And my latest job title, product designer. But what is product design? How do you get involved in it? How do you do product testing? How do you do product prototyping? And how do you build robust design systems to support your product? Well, that's what I'm covering in this course. There's so much involved and I want you to be involved too. So why not join me and give your products the best chance of success? The other thing that is crucial, I think, to product design, and we're going to unpack all of these things more later, but is this idea of just simplicity, right? But having a mechanism by which you can take anything and make it simpler, right? Having a process for doing that is so invaluable, right? I regularly get called in to sort out web apps, right? And I was doing one quite recently, actually, for a warehouse management software. And it had been created by a very talented team of developers that had done an amazing job. But they'd been asked to add more and more and more to it, new pieces of fun. Every time a client asked for a piece of functionality, they just added it in. And it's not their job to kind of sort out the user experience. So eventually they got me involved. And the route that I use when I'm faced by that is really, really simple. It's not rocket science. This is a starting point. You do reach a point where you need to kind of rethink the whole structure of the thing. But what I was basically doing there was going through screen by screen. And on each screen, I would look at every single element on that screen, every menu item, every icon, every input field, absolutely everything on that screen. And I asked myself 3 questions in order, right? Question number 1 is, can I remove this? What happens if I just remove it, delete it? Let's get rid of it, right? And sometimes it's amazing how much you can do that. So, for example, icons, right? That app was riddled with icons. Every option had an icon next to it. And then you reach a point where it's like, well, how does this icon help, right? Because it was all English speaking. It wasn't meant to be multilingual. So it's like, what's this adding to it? You know, what would happen if I deleted it? And the answer was, well, nothing. At which point you go, well, let's delete it then, right? But obviously there are some things you can't delete, right? For example, the main menu that was going down the left-hand side, right? Loads of different options, all of which were apparently essential. Set aside whether they all were or not. So, as I worked down that menu, my next question was, well, can I hide some of these elements in this menu, right? You know, instead of, they had like 30, I think it was something like 30 elements all down the side menu. And it was like, my eyes are bleeding looking at this list. And I said, well, which ones of these are used the most, right? To which the answer was, well, people really are only looking at those 4. All right, well, why are all the others there then? So I put all the rest under a kind of ... thing, or hiding things away, or should we be doing that? Well, if 80% of people are looking at those 4, then let's make it easy for those 80% of people before we worry about the 20% that are looking for other obscure things, right? And sure, there are other ways of solving it. We could have had different permissions that had different things in the menu, but that was the quick and easy way of just hiding some stuff, right? And then, but sometimes you can't hide things. So the biggest, the great example of that is, we need to show our privacy policy and our cookie notifications for compliance reasons, right? It was you work in banking, don't you, as I remember? Yeah, banking's terrible for this. You have loads of compliance things all over the place, right? Oh, no, you couldn't hide that because, you know, you need to tell people that their house is at risk, you know? But what you can do is you can shrink it. You can visually de-emphasize it, right? So that it doesn't dominate the design and it's not adding confusion and clutter. This isn't rocket science, is it? But you have to go through every element on every screen doing this, saying, can I remove it? No. Can I hide it? No. Can I shrink it? Yes. So there's kind of 3 common mistakes that I often come across when I see people kind of prioritizing their workloads around features and minimal viable products and all that kind of stuff. And I just wanted to flag them up for people, really. First is a rush discovery. The pressure to deliver is often so high that people jump straight into prototyping without doing any kind of upfront user research. And on the course that we did on user research and testing, I shared some ways that you can actually do, a discovery phase pretty quickly and pretty well. So I'm not saying we always need long, drawn-out discovery phases with endless user interviews and diary studies and all these kinds of convoluted stuff, but just taking a pause for a minute and, establishing some of the basics in terms of what users need, who the user groups are, those kinds of things. You can't just jump straight into Figma every time when you're kicking off a new feature or working on an MVP. The other big problem is post-launch iteration not happening. I've really already said that, so I don't need to say a huge amount more there. But after a feature is delivered, nobody's checking back to ensure that it's performing. Whose job is that? There's a question for you. I honestly don't know, right? Whose job is that? Is it, if you've got a product owner, then fair enough. But oftentimes there isn't a product owner, which is a whole problem in its own right, right? So, I would take that on. If I'm working in a product design role, I would take that on as one of my responsibilities because I feel that post-launch optimization and iteration is so fundamental to the success of a product and the design of a product that I have to keep flagging it. And then finally, a lack of holistic thinking. This can be a problem with Agile, right? Don't get me wrong. Wouldn't dare criticize Agile because, I value my life. But Agile is, dare to say, not perfect in every scenario. And it is a model that has been born out of developers and how developers work. And one of the things when it comes to product design is it's very important to think holistically and to kind of see things as a whole. And when you work in sprints, which are focused on an individual feature or something like that, you don't have that sense of kind of big picture, how all of these bits fit together. And so that's dangerous.
Well, I have a question. So, no holistic thinking is a mistake. How do you prevent holistic overthinking? Especially if you have a group where you try to get contribution from stakeholders, developers, design team, and sometimes it just becomes the Wordex,
Yes.
In terms of, especially for the legacy systems.
Yeah. So I would encourage you to check out my course on user research and testing because I use testing and research to cut through all of that, right? So when you've got the problem only comes, it's fine having lots of stakeholders all expressing opinions, right? That's all right, okay? The problem only comes when A, there's nobody to make the final decision over it, and B, there becomes points of conflict and disagreement between the stakeholders, both of which pretty much always happen, right? Those are so common, it's ridiculous. So if we don't have someone that's making the final decision and who is informed to make that final decision, then, well, let's find out. Let's get hard evidence to support this. So whenever there's any kind of disagreement, I turn to testing, right? Let's ask users. Let's find out. And that course is all about lightweight ways of basically doing that. So it's worth just taking a pause before you jump into prototyping. I think a lot of people jump into prototyping maybe a bit too soon. A little bit of upfront planning will help ensure that your time is used efficiently when you do prototype. So one of the things that I like to do is a kind of before prototyping step, although you could argue it's a type of prototype in its own right, is user flows. I don't know whether this is anything anybody has had a play with, but I find it really great to just kind of plan out how the different pages will work and what the flow through the application will be. For a start, I'm particularly seeking to answer what are the entry points into the app. How people might arrive in it. Is it always through a login? And do they always land at the same dashboard, or could they come in through a deep link? All of those kinds of things are quite useful to plan out beforehand. Then obviously there's the key actions and steps. What potential steps a user might go through to reach the different goals that you've got on the site. Whether people are going to be skipping around the site a lot. Oftentimes I find with apps that they're not very streamlined in that way. So to complete an overall goal, they have to go into one section, then come out of that section and go into another section. And there's no nice flow through it. So planning all of that out beforehand helps me at least. Then there's decision points. So identifying critical decision moments in the flow. So for example, with an e-commerce site, there is obviously the decision of whether to add something to basket, but there's also then the decision of whether to actually proceed through checkout, because a lot of people add things to a basket and then abandon it. So knowing when those key moments are in the app often is important. And error handling and feedback, right? So I try and think through, where are things likely to go wrong? How are they likely to go wrong? And how am I going to respond to that? So a user flow is basically, a kind of a series of individual screens that kind of show the flow through the application and branching points where certain decisions are being made, etc. So yeah, I'm a fan of those. And then finally, the other thing that I do look at with user flows is alternate paths. So, sometimes people can come at a piece of functionality from different directions and, will they have the relevant context, etc. So I kind of fiddle around with that a little bit. Doesn't need to be perfect, but just to kind of get an initial thinking before I go too far into it. Once I've got that, then it's a matter of deciding on the fidelity of the prototype that I need to create. And that kind of depends very much on where I am in the process of the application, because I don't tend to just create one prototype when I'm building out an app. I potentially could make many prototypes. And I know that sounds a little bit overkill, but sometimes it's just easier to do it that way, and so I do it. So for example, you might be doing ideation right at the very beginning. So you might be running a workshop where you've got stakeholders in and you're kind of trying to create lots of ideas. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did this or that and the other? And that's where I see paper prototypes as being really valuable, is just kind of sketching out ideas in those meetings. I know a lot of people are huge fans of paper prototyping, and they take on those paper prototyping and they test with them. And to me, that feels like madness. Because they're very low fidelity, and so it's quite hard for users to picture what's going on. But also, paper prototypes aren't easy to edit and change and fiddle around with, So I see the main version, for me personally, paper prototypes are great for chucking out lots of ideas to begin with. And then I kind of lose interest in them after that. So when we start narrowing down our ideas, to something that's a bit more solid, then I'll increase the fidelity a little bit, and I'll jump into some grayscale prototyping. So where I'm not really worrying too much about the design, but I'm trying to get the main kind of elements in place and how it all flows together and works together. And that's usually tangible enough to do a little bit more kind of development and refine it, test with it and explore it a bit more. So I spend quite a long time in grayscale prototyping generally. Then as I start to iterate on things and it's beginning to come together and I've got a stronger direction, then I start to create clickable prototypes. Sometimes this can still be the grayscales, right? So, you know, I'm just kind of joining those together and making them click through from one to the other, because I'm beginning to have a bit more of a strong direction, and there tends to be more testing that's going on at that stage. And then as we're trying to finalize the approach so that the developers can go off and do their thing, and they've got something that is effectively a functional specification, because I'm not a fan of written functional specifications personally, because they're open to interpretation and people can disagree over what was meant in a written functional specification. But a good prototype is much more concrete and much more obvious what's going to happen. So at that stage, I end up with a much more interactive, richer, higher fidelity prototype.